Well, it's finally game week at South Carolina, where the Gamecocks take on Coastal Carolina Saturday at Williams-Brice Stadium noon, the first game of the 2018 season. Game week means what Will Muschamp promised would be the one and only depth chart of the fall was released on Tuesday. There were a lot of questions going into that release about most of the positions. The offense basically, was a known commodity except for running back, where we're still unsure because all four guys are listed as OR players, with Rico Dowdle at the top of the list. My guess is he starts there. Safety was an issue, and there were surprises there. What did you think of the secondary and the way that shook out?
Well, it was pretty impressive that JT eBay made kind of the jump he did. He missed a big chunk of camp following hip surgery, and he came out as a starting safety, jumping Jemias Williams and kind of Nick Harvey, who'd been working over there. So it'll be interesting to see what the Rice transfer actually can deliver, and interesting to see how much those other two safeties kind of get involved and get in the mix. What kind of stood out to you, Josh?
Well, Jemias Williams, I want to see where he lands. This is a guy who was a true freshman last year, was the jewel of South Carolina's recruiting class, a guy that there were a lot of high hopes for, that we heard a lot about as a punt returner. Not in the punt return conversation this fall. Brian Edwards will be the starting punt returner, just sort of FYI. Now he's a backup in the secondary. Where does he eventually land? J.C. Horn, the true freshman who we've heard so much about, will start at nickelback, which is where Jemias started last year. So, does Jemias end up a nickelback? Does he end up a safety? Does he have to wait for J.C. Horn to move outside the cornerback next year when Keyshawn Nixon and Rashad Fentner gone before he can get a starting job back? So, for me, that's sort of one of those in-the-weeds things that I'll be looking. And then at running back, Will Muschamp says all four guys have earned the chance to play. All four guys are going to play, I think, according to Will Muschamp, against Coastal Carolina. They keep saying they want a dominant running back, a lead back. You can't have a lead back if you're going in and saying we've got four guys who deserve to play and we're going to play them all. That may not be fair to somebody, but if you're going to have a lead back, you've got to pick a lead back. So that will be interesting to see how that shakes out. Anything else with you that jumped out? I mean, there's 7 true freshmen on the 2 deep. I don't think we're hugely surprised by that.
No, not particularly. And Muschamp in his weekly press conference basically said for the guys who aren't necessarily starters, even on offensive line, he hopes to get them a chance to play against Coastal, perhaps showing what he thinks of how that game might go. But also interesting to see that he might try to get those young guys involved pretty early.
Gamecocks a 29.5 to 30-point favorite, depending on where you look in the opening game, the second ever against Coastal. I think that South Carolina will be vanilla, which is something that Ben doesn't think exists as a concept, but he can explain that to you. I think South Carolina, obviously, no matter what they say, like everybody else in the world, has an eye toward next week in Georgia. I think South Carolina will probably cover because I think Coastal's just flat overmatched. But I don't expect to see everything that South Carolina's new offense will be this week.
I think I likewise think South Carolina is going to roll pretty handily. I think the biggest and most interesting question I have looking into it is, one, obviously, what does the new offense look like? But then also, how sort of smooth is it? And by that I mean, if you look back to the opener against NC State last season, there were signs of hope for the offense, and there were signs that maybe things weren't all the way there. Coming out of the game, we kind of focused on the hope aspect because that made sense. And by year's end, if you look back at that first game, you could have said, well, there were some seeds there. So I think looking at sort of the glitchy parts of the offense are going to be the thing I'm most looking forward to. That said, I still think South Carolina wins in the 40-10 range. What do you think, Josh?
I think you could see as much as 50, or these games are impossible to predict a score for me. I would never bet a game where there's a 30 or plus point line, but I do think since I'm forced to pick here by our powers that be, I'll pick South Carolina to cover, and then we can all begin looking to Georgia, which is what everybody wants to do anyway.